Welcome everyone to Karma Insights. Today we have Nick Zemanek and Swaye Beningo with us today, and we are going to be talking about hybrid agile. And this is a topic that comes up on a lot of our engagements, and a lot of clients speak about it. And I'd like to just start off by sharing, that I think that there's a lot of good reason for this, frankly. And when you specifically look at highly regulated environments, where let's just say that there's some kind of policy or some kind of regulation that is put in place, and that needs to be implemented in some shape or form. So at a certain level, you have a really, defined, boundaries, so to speak. There's kind of some sand. There are some lines drawn in the sand for this kind of project, and then frankly also clients and or stakeholders need some assurances when something will be delivered and what will be delivered. The way I tend to think of this is that we're not iterating on features for Spotify here. We might be developing an application to ensure that citizens are getting financial assistance, or citizens are getting some kind of healthcare or some kind of need, or something is being processed. And these are human needs that need to be fulfilled. And the aspect of moving from policy and regulation to operationalizing something, to figuring out what is the operations, to figuring out what is the technology, and then actually getting something out the door really requires organizations and teams to be agile, for lack of better words here. There's a very cyclical nature to it, to get something out the door, to make sure that things can adjust based on the changing policies, regulations, etc. So first, Nick, could you just share with us a little bit what is hybrid agile from your perspective?
Yeah. So, I guess let's level set a little bit and, talk about each one. And then I think, hybrid agile will make a little more sense. When I first started, doing software development years ago, I didn't realize that there were, multiple, methodologies. It seems like agile really came over the past 10 years or so. I just thought waterfall was the way that, you delivered software, and I didn't even know it really had a name. So, what is waterfall, and, why it's been done for so long? First off, whoever named it is very appropriately named. I appreciate that. But, waterfall is basically a gated approach to software development where each phase occurs after another phase is over. So you gather requirements, then when requirements are signed off, you work on the design, then development, testing, and eventually release. So, flows just like a waterfall. And what that does is makes it very, very defined, which is good from, defined budgets and timelines and, clarity for business and executive teams on the solutions being delivered. But it's pretty rigid, not a lot of room for changing requirements like you mentioned. So, one phase after the other. Whereas agile, the key here is iterations. So smaller releases, more frequent iterative releases, and constantly delivering improvements. And what that gets you is you provide a small release, you get feedback from the client, if they have changing requirements, and then basically complete that cycle over again. So when I think of waterfall, I think of a linear line straight down. When I think of agile, I think of a circle, just constantly iterating on that. And so similar to waterfall, some benefits and challenges. The benefit is, of course, you can deliver on changing customer requirements. So you mentioned Spotify and some highly changing technologies that we're all accustomed to deliver, getting constant updates on, and to meet the ever changing needs. Agile is what you want to use here. And you can really build relationships and incorporate customer feedback that way. So the customer and the end user is a really key component to get that feedback and have that continuous feedback loop. But with that, you have a little bit of lack of clarity in that end solution, lack of clarity in the budget and timelines. So depending on what organization you're in, there might need to be a balance between these two. So increased clarity, but also changing customer requirements. That's kind of what we're trying to balance here with the hybrid agile.
Got it, got it. Yeah, Sway, you have had the opportunity to implement software, I'd probably say all around the world in some shape or form. So you have seen this from a lot of different types of software, but also different countries of like how different folks are doing this. I'd be curious to hear about your experience, of implementing waterfall or agile, and what you have seen in some of those experiences. And I don't know if there are differences, but I'm just curious because you've just seen so many examples of this, and you've actually done this so many times.
Yeah, I think similar to Nick, when I started off, the only plans we knew were just huge project plans. And I remember when I first started with an HMO, and they showed me the project plan that they were trying to implement, and it spanned across a whole wall, about 5 pages in Microsoft Project. And I said, wow, this is a lot to absorb here. And, I think that was really the traditional approach, really trying to map everything out in detail and every stage of the project. And unfortunately, when I got there, I know they had this huge, beautiful project plan, but it was completely, the project was off schedule and out of budget. They had no more money. And I was like, well, this is not really that useful. So, I basically, had to go in and really start from scratch. And I think that was when I first got introduced to a more agile approach, trying to break things down into more discrete sessions of development, the sprints, and really understand, what can we implement right now and to get some quick wins. So I think, this is something I've seen, the industry has evolved and it's moving much faster now. And I think, hybrid agile definitely gives you that more agility and a more realistic picture of what's going on.
Have you seen any examples where doing a very traditional waterfall approach to a project is the right way to go?
I'm trying to think. I think possibly if you have, let's say you're implementing a module where you know all the requirements of that module, the software doesn't have a lot of customization, and you know exactly what you're getting into, then you could possibly go for that kind of waterfall approach because it's been done 100 times before, and you know exactly how long it's going to take and who's going to need to be involved. I think waterfall could have a place there, but I think the thing with agile is there's so many uncertainties there, and you want to just build in a bit more flexibility most of the time, just because things often don't work out the way you plan.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I think that probably the ethos that I most appreciate with this kind of stuff is it probably will not work out the way you plan. Is probably the most important takeaway from what you're sharing there, Sway. And I think that my opinion on this is evolving to the place where even when all the requirements are really well laid out and you are in effect doing a waterfall, like it could be a totally waterfall based kind of project. The breaking things into these smaller sprints and being able to say by the end of that sprint that we have tested, that we have code reviewed, and that we feel comfortable with those components goes a real long way to not only relieve stress from the folks that are overseeing the implementation, but also the end stakeholders, because like it's so easy just to keep being like, yeah, we fixed XYZ problems and we're going to fix XYZ problems next week. There was a couple other things, and then it keeps rolling over. And I would say maybe waterfall is not, maybe it could be uh, more appropriately named as like an avalanche, because you keep finding issues and then it just keeps snowball until you just like get bulldozed at the end. And I personally had just so many experiences of engagements where we embarked on a waterfall project, or frankly, we were brought in to remediate a waterfall project where, frankly, there had been an attempt to implement this giant student information system, and it was 5 years delayed. And $50 million was spent, and just like you, Sway, I saw a 200-page Microsoft project plan, and they were like, well, all of this stuff has been complete, and there was absolutely nothing to show for it.
No.
And it was the most like demoralizing thing for everyone. And I think that that's probably actually a really important aspect of this too, is that this isn't just about getting the work done. It's about actually keeping people motivated to keep working at something too, right? And whether you're a developer, project manager, or business analyst, I think that you need to see some fruits of your labor. Otherwise, you're gonna lose it. You're just gonna say, what am I doing here? So that's at least a little bit of my take on some of those things.
Yeah, I've found that it makes the conversation, as someone on the business analyst, technical side, it really makes the conversation easier when working with your business user counterparts, because as you mentioned, regardless of a project, waterfall, agile, there's going to be changing requirements at some point. And I know, just thinking back to my more strict waterfall days, those requirements were taking them in, and then you compare them. If a customer has a need, they thought something was going to work a little bit differently, you go back to your requirements document, check to see if that requirement's in there. And if it's not in there, then, you're going to have to meet that at the next maintenance release or the first maintenance release. And that maintenance release sometimes, was seemed to be almost just as big as the main primary, first release, just because there were so many changing requirements by the end that couldn't be met because of that strict waterfall approach.
Yeah. I sometimes wonder when I think about waterfall versus hybrid agile, and I probably should just read the history of this, but I wonder if the idea around waterfall came more from the concepts of around like constructing a building, so to speak, where it had to all be planned out, because if you made any single mistake, then the building wouldn't stand, right? And that makes sense to me in that context. But in software, you are building a structure, so to speak, but you have a little bit more flexibility, and needs can change. And of course, that can happen in construction too, but I suppose it is still this aspect of translating what folks want into a piece of software that it lends itself to being far more of a continually changing scope, so to speak. So on this note, I think I'd be curious from both of you, frankly, if you were to say, the some of the most important takeaways that you have found in implementing, projects from a hybrid agile methodology, what would you say those are?
Yeah, so we look at more like of an iterative development, um, as opposed to a whole iterative project planning through release,
Mm,
agile. So when we're talking about hybrid agile, that's kind of more what we're talking about, at least from my experience, is the development is iterative. So um, you have a sprint, either as a business analyst or with your client or your customer, your business user. You present to them what the development was done and get their feedback and continue that feedback loop. um, but I guess one of the keys to that, it doesn't always just have to be development that is agile or a whole project is agile. I'd recommend, if your organization is waterfall, you're looking to get to an agile approach. um, See where in your current methodology that you can implement some of these more agile characteristics. For instance, one thing I've seen, you go through or maybe a good baby step, you go through your whole development, user testing cycle that follows a more traditional waterfall approach. But maybe you have one extra sprint after user testing, a quick 2-3 day development sprint with a couple extra days for internal and user testing to meet some of the requirements that were changed once the user saw it during your user acceptance testing. So thinking about just like different small tweaks that you can make in your current development cycle to meet some changing requirements in your organization.
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I did want to say one thing, and so I'd love to hear from you in a second. One of the things that I'm realizing, though, that is important to acknowledge in the hybrid agile space, and we're going to talk about this in part two of this conversation in far more depth, is that it does require a lot more engagement by the end users and stakeholders, because you're not simply getting requirements or what they need and then just going off and developing, and they just continue their operational role. They are engaged the whole way. And that's a big shift. And I think that's even a big shift from executives to understand that folks are not just taking like operational roles, they're supporting in the development of software that is supporting that role. And that could be 20, 30, 40% of their role, frankly, right? And I think that is a key aspect of hybrid agile and frankly tech in general, and how it is seeping from just what was very much a binary consideration of just, hey, this is what tech folks worry about, to now this is something that all folks need to be engaged in some shape or form. But Sway, please, you were
Yeah.
about to share something.
Yeah, I think just touching upon what you were saying, I think with the hybrid agile approach, communication becomes a lot more important. And like you were saying, you're no longer working in a silo, and the development team goes away for 6 months and you don't hear anything. It's more about that constant feedback, and a large part of that is building the relationship with the end users. And I think it really brings an organization, to a point where they're working closer, more strategically when they have a more agile approach, because you know where you're going and you have a better idea, how you're going to get there, and the progress you're making towards those goals. So I think, agile, there's that additional benefit of, just that open communication, and reducing the silos and breaking down walls in respects to what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, 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 absolutely, absolutely. Well, look, there's so much more we can talk about here, and we're definitely gonna have a part two of this conversation. Uh, I'm, I think that I'll put this as a final thought on this before we jump into the next area, is that figuring out how to implement solutions, whether it's from a technology perspective, an operations perspective, how to realize a strategy, whatever it might be, things are complicated. right now, especially. And the reason I say that is that things are continually in flux and continually changing. You are always moving from one rocking boat to another rocking boat. And I think that that is where we are all being forced to put on a far more agile mindset, and making it a hybrid agile mindset is probably the kindest thing we can do for everyone, to give everyone a little bit more certainty about what they're going to get, and a little bit more stability in what is a very fast changing environment uh, across businesses and governments and nonprofits, that at least we're seeing in all of our clients. Things are just changing so fast that you have to be a bit more humble. You don't know the perfect solution, and you're going to figure it out as you go. So thanks so much, Swaye and Nick, for being here, and sharing a lot of your experiences. And we're going to come back for a part 2 of this to get more into the weeds and the details of how to do this. And we also, of course, have a post on the website that you can take a look at, and we're going to have a bunch of links as well that can support you in these efforts. Thanks so much, everyone.
All right. Thanks.